thank you for joining today. My name is Lynette Johns, and I am the Director of Clinical and Scientific Affairs with Visionary Optics, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's webinar about stepping into a new fit with the new Europa Tangent. It is truly my honor to introduce Dr. Greg DeNaeyer as my co-speaker this evening. Dr. DeNaeyer, if you don't know him, I'd be surprised if you don't. He practices at Arena Surgeons in Columbus, Ohio. He was the co-founder and past president of the Scleral Lens Education Society. He is currently a contributing editor for Contact Lens Spectrum, and he contributes to review of cornea and contact lenses and optometric management. Dr. DeNaeyer has received both prestigious awards from the GPLI and the Scleral Lens Society as the Practitioner of the Year Award. He has lectured internationally on all things scleral and keratoconus and everything in between. And Dr. DeNaeyer, it's just such a treat to have you with us tonight, and I'm so excited to learn from your cases as we move on in today's presentation.
Thanks, Lynette. Looking forward to this.
So I just want to introduce everybody before we get started with the lens design about Visionary Optics. Visionary Optics is proud to have a long, almost 20-year history in scleral lenses. We're extremely focused on technology, innovation, and clinical research revolving around scleral shape measurement. Our team has a deep knowledge of scleral lens designs and are able to provide personalized service expertise to help design and modify your lenses and help your patients enjoy their lives with clear vision and comfortable vision as well. We're going to get started talking about the original Europa standard design, and this is what Dr. DeNaeyer had his hand in designing. It's an excellent design with lots of versatility. There's 5 curves to the design. There's base curve and then 4 peripheral curves. PC stands for peripheral curves. And with this design, it has helped many patients, and it has really evolved not only with the standard, but it also shaped the beginnings of the Europa Tangent design, which we're going to speak about right now. Now, the Europa Tangent design is actually a 3-zone lens. So if you found 5 curves are a little too intimidating as a new fitter, you have 3 curves to work with. And what's so nice about this PC2 is it combines the nice landing zone of the original standard lens of PC2, 3, and 4 into an even landing zone. PC1 is the transition zone or the limbal zone. So there's 3 curves to this lens, basically the base curve, the central clearance zone, the limbal zone, and the landing zone. That transition to the landing zone has been smoothed and softened with the Europa Tangent. Now, when you're looking at the standard on the left, you can actually see it's a nice landing zone and the vessel's course that's right through it. But the Europa Tangent has an even softer landing zone that you can see, and those vessels are just nicely unimpeded when you're looking at this design. This lens has been designed by science. Dr. DeNaeyer has been influential in the scleral shape study group, and this is one of his papers that looked at scleral shape using scleral profilometry. So looking at the design of the periphery next to the limbus and how the scleral shape changes in all the meridians around the eye, as well as the further you go from the limbus. So the S-map that's part of Visionary Optics creates a free-form lens called the latitude. And the latitude has this nice smooth landing zone as well. And using all the data that was derived by this profilometry data, Visionary Optics was able to create a landing zone that's designed by the science of the profilometry data points. So you can see the nice smooth landing zone and the tapered edge that creates a nice, even, softer zone for the lens to rest on. When we're talking about the Europa Tangent fitting set, it's a 12 lens diagnostic set, and the lens diameters are a base 16.5 millimeter diameter. There are 6 spherical lenses and 6 toric lenses. And we want to thank you for today's attendance. So we're offering a promotion of 50% off the fitting set. You'll be seeing this QR code throughout tonight's discussion. And if you click on that, or you scan that, I should say, and you scroll all the way down, you can sign up for the fitting set and receive that for your office. I'm going to go into a little more details about the fitting set. So this is just a top-down look at what the fitting set includes. And here are the spherical lenses on the top. They do not have peripheral toricity. The difference between each lens here is 200 microns of sagittal height difference. And as you go higher into the sag heights, there's more of a 350 micron difference. Now, we've all had some unique cases. I'm sure Dr. DeNaeyer has had plenty. I've seen some of his photos and his presentations and his papers. And sometimes you get a lens that kisses the cornea and it's the deepest lens of the set. Don't worry about that. You can contact consultation and they will design a really deep lens for you or a different diameter if necessary. Now, I said these lenses are 16.5 millimeter diameter lenses, but based off of this fitting set, you can fit a 15.5 all the way up to a 20 millimeter lens in 0.5 millimeter steps. But you can use this set as the starting point. You do not need to buy additional lenses. The toric fitting set lenses at the bottom, what's unique about this set is it has 2 amounts of toricity. 200 micron toric lenses are the first 3, and 400 micron torics are the last 3. And I find this to be so valuable. When I was using this in the clinic, I found that there's always that one patient, you put the lens on, if you put a spherical lens on, you keep getting these bubbles, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this lens is toric. And then I put the 200 micron lens in, and it still was teetering and bubbles were coming in. I was able to put the 400 micron toric lens, and it sealed off that edge lift, and it was just a highly toric eye. And we all run into these patients throughout the day, and now we have the ability to have an even higher amount of toricity in the set. Now, if you're afraid of touching those torics, if you're a new beginner and you're afraid to touch those toric lenses and you use the standard lenses, you can design a toric lens just by talking to consultation. They'll walk you through that, no problem. The only thing I'll just highlight is that the haptic of the toric lens, the flat haptic, is 2 steps flatter than the standard lens. So if you're using the standard lens to design a toric, and then you put on the toric lenses instead, the flat meridian is just a little bit flatter. So it's equivalent to saying this is 2 steps flatter than the standard, and the toricity is 2 steps steeper than the standard in the steep meridian. So we're going to launch into a polling question. What are your most common reasons for scleral lens remakes? I don't know about you, Dr. DeNaeyer, but I find vaulting issues not so much for me, but I run into either limbal issues or compression and impingement. It really depends on where I'm at in the fitting process. I don't know. What do you think? What are your reasons for your remakes?
I think if I looked at all my cases, even going 10 years back or so, that certainly compression or impingement are typically the most problematic issues that I might see with any particular fit.
Exactly. That can be a problem. I'm going to just go to the next slide here, if I can advance it. If you do, so everybody is starting to say that compression and impingement is a big one. Limbal issues comes in second. And, of course, there's always those nuances for those other reasons for remakes. So with the Europa Tangent lens, the Europa Tangent lens has the step system fitting. So it should make the process of streamlining your fit a lot easier and smoother to do this. The key number to remember in this design is 50 microns. So you don't have to remember a different step for the periphery versus the limbus versus the central clearance. It's all 50 micron steps. That said, I know that at the limbus, you need to have 25 microns every now and again or smaller steps. So you can order half steps, but just remember, for the most part, any step change you use is 50 micron steps. And that's for central clearance, limbal clearance, and the landing zone. So let's talk about the sag. In this design, what's really unique about it is that you can actually change your sag independent of your base curve. I think those of you that are used to using the standard Europa lens are used to changing your sag with the base curve. And this is the difference between the tangent and the standard lens, is that now you can untether the base curve from the sag. I mean, you can definitely do that with the standard lens too. But for the most part, if you want to have one base curve, you can keep the base curve and raise and lower the roof in 50 micron step changes. You still can change your sag with the base curve only, and you can just tell consultation if that's what you would prefer. The other feature is the contour curve. The contour curve lives within PC1 or the limbal zone of the design. Now, I'm just going to warn you, this lens is totally not drawn to scale, but it's just drawn to highlight the difference. So with all of our scleral, all of our corneas that we run into clinic with, they have different configurations. So sometimes you need to have an oblate design, and basically an oblate is flatter next to the base curve and then steepens toward the periphery. And the prolate is more of a natural flattening, where it's continues to flatten as you go from the base curve. So why would you use a prolate versus an oblate lens? For prolate patients, for prolate lenses, it would be mostly those keratoconus patients, keratoglobus, or patients with normal cornea shape. So like those ocular surface disease, for example. Whereas the oblate design, I would use those predominantly for post-surgical cases. So penetrating keratoplasty, post-refractive surgery, and sometimes in those pellucid marginal degeneration cases where not where the pellucid is bulging out, but where it's just got almost like a shelf. So with this design, you don't have to have a set of prolate or a set of oblate lenses. You can just order it based on what you're seeing. And, in some cases, you want to fit a flat base curve in a keratoconus patient just to reduce the amount of power in the lens itself. So some people like to do that. And what's nice is if you're going to do that and make a flat base curve for a keratoconus lens, you can still maintain that nice prolate shape. Again, this is really what's nice about this design, is you can go with the prolate or the oblate, but you don't need extra lenses in the set. Now, when we're talking about the limbus, this is one of those things that gets me all the time. I find that I didn't fit with an OCT, so I didn't have that luxury. And so the best way to evaluate the limbus was actually seeing the patient when they returned after they've worn the lens for a few hours. And this is where it's always super important to take the lens off and stain the eye after for your fit follow-up. In this particular study, Nixon et al. Reported in contact lens anterior eye that they found this arcuate type staining, and it would be this negative and positive staining, these little bubbles, microbullae that would form. And they determined that the reason that these formed was likely mechanical. And I would say that anytime you see something this nicely shaped, that doesn't typically happen in nature, right, Dr. DeNaeyer? You usually don't see perfectly arcuate things unless it's a LASIK flap or something like that. So when you see that, that's chances are you were kissing the limbus. And what's nice about the tangent lens is you can just increase your limbal clearance in 50 micron steps. And if you feel that 50 microns is too much, you can do a half step here. Now, another feature that I really like about this lens, just like the Europa standard lens, is you can change those zone sizes independent of the diameter as well. So you're not set with a chamber size for this design. You can increase or decrease the chamber size independent of the independent of the diameter. But you can also change the overall diameter too. Like I said before, you can make this from a 15.5 all the way up to a 20 millimeter lens. So if you want to increase your clearance in the limbus, I would actually just increase the overall diameter. I think that's the best way to go, because while you're increasing that zone, you're not taking away from your landing zone. You can support your landing zone and increase that depth, that chamber as well. So that's what's nice about the limbal changes. And then the landing zone changes are pretty straightforward. 50 micron steps for the landing zone. I don't know about you, Dr. DeNaeyer. I think 50 micron steps is probably too little to see a change clinically significant. I would say maybe, well, it depends. Maybe 100 would make more of a change when you're doing incremental step changes. I don't know. What do you think, Dr. DeNaeyer?
It really is hard at the limbus to number one. First, if you're just using the slit lamp to examine the patient and you're looking for limbal clearance, it's hard to gauge. I think OCT can help out quite a bit, but then even with OCT, you're trying to find where is the limbus, and so typically I don't have to change the limbus a lot. I find that 16.5 millimeter diameter lens will easily vault most limbuses, especially if the cornea is a more average shape. You might have trouble with larger diameter corneas, like if they're over 12.5 millimeters or so, then you might need to go to a larger lens or increase that limbal area as you discussed.
Exactly. And what do you think is a clinically significant change for the landing zone?
Oh, I mean, yeah. So the landing zone, I would go around 100 microns or so of adjustment.
Yeah. I would say like I only do a 50 micron tweak if a patient's got kind of a tickly awareness, then I might just drop it down because I'm always afraid of going too tight on a lens. So when you're using the tangent lens, the fitting set, you can just start with a toric trial immediately if you think that you have a toric eye, or you can use the spherical lenses first, determine your ideal sag, do your over-refraction, and then talk to consultation and have them make a toric periphery or go straight to the toric trial afterwards. It's entirely up to you and up to what you're seeing. So we're talking about torics, but is this eye toric? I'm going to put this polling question up right now and see if this eye is toric. Do you think that there is an axis of the steep meridian is at 90? Do you think it's at 30 or running between 2 and 8 o'clock? Is it at 120 between 5 and 11 o'clock? Or are you just not sure? You'd ask for consultations, help, or it's not toric? And I think when I'm looking at this eye, I would actually say I don't want to sway the vote just yet. I'm going to let people answer a little bit more, but I think Dr. DeNaeyer, something's jumping out at you.
I'm going to vote 2 and 8 o'clock.
Exactly. I agree. And let's see here. I love that people are honest and say they're not sure and they would ask consultation for help. So I think a lot of people were thinking the same as that feel that it was toric was exactly at 2 and 8 o'clock as well. And this is the secret. When you see that fluorescein exchange happening, you know that that's your steep meridian. You've got a little bit of a gap. The eye is bending away from the plastic, the exchange is coming in, and you want to bring that plastic down to align to the scleral surface. So the correct answer is 2 and 8 o'clock when you see this fluorescein exchange. Now, if you're new to scleral lens fitting and you're used to putting fluorescein in the bowl, and it's really, that's the best way to see clearance, especially when you're getting used to this. So how do you determine if you're seeing exchange in that when you already have fluorescein? Well, that can be tricky. So what you could potentially do, I've never done this. I don't know if Dr. DeNaeyer, if you've done this. If you filled the lens with fluorescein, you probably could paint the surface with lissamine and have the patient blink and then see where the lissamine's seeping in from. I'm wondering if that would work. Probably would. You could see it seep in that way.
Yeah, I've not done that, but certainly fluorescein can help in this situation.
Now, the reverse is when you're trying to find your flat axis, that can be tricky too, especially when you're new to this. And so it's either edge lift or compression. And so edge lift is usually your steep meridian, your eye is curving away from the plastic. Whereas compression, you're bearing really hard down on the flat meridian. So in this particular case, you can actually see it's a tight lens all the way around, but you can see it's even really tight along that 3 and 9 meridian. So that's your flat axis. So if you're not sure, if you're one of those people that's just really, this toricity is just too hard to figure out, just pay attention to what you're seeing, write your notes down, and consultation is going to be there for you every step of the way. You just tell them at 3 and 9, I am seeing this really harsh compression. 6 and 12, it's there, but not as bad. They'll know what to do with that. The other thing too is the secret is your eye always tells its secrets after the lens is off. And you can see that there is this rebound hyperemia when the lens comes off. And you're not seeing it all the way around. You're seeing it just at 3 and 9. That's telling me that that's a with the rule sclera. Do you have any tips about how you would determine toricity?
I prefer looking at the lens on the eye and looking for areas of compression. Obviously with toricity, the area where the lens might compress the bulbar conjunctiva will be opposed 180 degrees away. And then obviously 90 degrees from that, then you can have areas of alignment or edge lift. And we'll see some examples of that with my cases.
I'm looking forward to that. Going into the lens markings on the diagnostic lens, we have the ID marking here. So for a toric lens, T2, and then the dioptric value of the base curve, 46, is listed. Now, with the toric lens, what's really important to walk away with is to know that the hash mark is on the steep meridian, okay? So again, that is your steep meridian of your lens. When you put a toric lens on, always tell consultation where you found the hash mark, and they will design that for you. Now, the patient lens markings, what I love about this is that you actually know that it's a right and left because it says R or L for the right and left. It has the order number, and the clock starts at 0 with the new warranty. So if this patient was wearing a lens from 2 years ago and you reorder, 1R will be the newest order. So you can always know based on the order number and which lens number it is, what they're wearing. And this is really important because the dots may wear off sometimes, and one dot is right eye, two dots is left eye, but you'll always be able to see this wonderful R and L to make sure your patients haven't mixed up their lenses. Another feature is that the patient lenses have markings at 3 and 9 o'clock. And that's just something to keep in mind when you're when you get your lenses, so that you always know the orientation, that there's no rotation of the lens. So even if the toricity axis is 60 degrees, we pay attention to that. You don't always have to line that up. You just know that every lens that you receive once you've made your first order, the marking should always be at 3 and 9. And if they're not, you tell consultation how much it's rotated. And like I said, the dots will, the right has 1, the left has 2, and they can be made as black, white, or clear. The advanced customization remains available. There are so many features that are available to the Europa Tangent that have been long utilized in the Europa standard design. Toric optics, multifocal optics, center distance or center near, prism, higher order aberration correction, quadrant specifics, multi-meridians, precision lifts and notching, fenestrations. This is all available to you. And there's lots of wonderful things. So we always say it's easy until it's not. And when it's not, we have all of these customizations available to you. And we can walk you through that with consultation. So how do you order your lens? Basically, you tell them the lens number, if it's from a diagnostic lens or whichever patient lens they're wearing. Give them the power, whether it's vertexed or not. Tell consultation where those hash marks are. And then the 3 zones. You want to raise or lower the roof in steps, raise or lower the limbus in steps, and raise the landing zone in steps. So 50 microns is the magic number. You tell them if you want it as torics, and if you're not sure, they will guide you through with what you've observed. And then you can tell them what materials you prefer, if they're hydropegs, or if there's any diameter changes you need. So I'm gonna step away and have Dr. DeNaeyer step into his practice and tell you all about his cases.
All right, thanks, Lynette. I just want to walk through a couple of cases, actually very recent cases, where I've been able to efficiently and successfully fit the Europa Tangent lens design. I'm going to start with this 62-year-old female keratoconus patient who I've known for years. She had decades ago a corneal transplant of her left eye with irregularity and unfortunately recurrent keratoconus. And for many years, she's worn a corneal gas perm contact lens on that eye that really does not fit well. And in fact, actually, she continuously during the day has trouble with the lens decentering and actually expulsing from the eye. And it's not an exaggeration to say that if she would cough or sneeze, that lens could come out. It did provide her 20/25 vision, but I was able to talk her into being fit with a scleral contact lens. Next slide.
Not advancing. Sorry, there we go.
Okay. Okay, so to the left here is her left cornea, and we see the transplant. I think even with that two-dimensional image that you can get some sense that she has some ectasia, especially temporally there. The image to the right is her corneal elevation map. And what we see there is some moderate to mild irregularity, and that's certainly what's causing her not to see well unless she's wearing a gas perm contact lens. But that's not what makes this case difficult. What makes this case challenging is that if we look at her three-dimensional model of her anterior ocular surface, is that she's got significant steepening of her paralimbal cornea. And that steepening causes the entire surface to become very elevated. And this creates quite a challenge when we're trying to fit her either with a corneal gas perm contact lens or even when we fit her with a scleral contact lens. And next slide. This image is the scleral elevation map of her sclera. So the red circle in the center is her cornea, and it's just red. We're just ignoring that. The colors around that, those blue colors around that, represent her elevation profile of her sclera. And we can see that with this uniform blue color, that really her sclera, for the most part, is spherical. There's certainly no measurable toricity. And the only thing that we can really pick up is a 200 micron difference between the superior and inferior quadrants. And just for your own knowledge, at least in my experience, 200 microns is really the threshold of whether or not we have to deal with that in the landing zone. And just because she is just at that threshold value, I think we can start this fit with a spherical landing zone. And so I was able to start a fitting process with her using the Europa Tangent design. I used a 16 millimeter lens, which is slightly off from the standard, which Lynette explained was 16.5 millimeters. The material, we really wanted to use a hyper decay material to maximize oxygen to the cornea, so I chose Optimum Infinite. And just as advertised and just as suspected, we really had to go steep with this lens in order to properly clear the corneal surface. So the base curve of this lens was 54 diopters to give us a sagittal depth value of approximately 5,500 microns. So this lens is really steep, really deep. And with a power of minus 1175, she is able to see a perfect 20/20. And she is very comfortable with this contact lens. And something I want to point out as you look at the landing zone there is that it really is compression free. And my experience is that with typical standard design scleral contact lenses that might have multiple peripheral curve lens designs, like 4 peripheral curve haptics, is that as we get to the threshold value of 5,000 microns or more, those lenses typically exhibit lens compression in the landing zone. And so when that happens, then we have to go back and have that lens readjusted to eliminate that compression. With this lens, we see that with the first lens and no extra modifications, that we get a perfect even landing zone fit. So the advantage of the Europa Tangent in this case is that the landing zone remains compression free even when the design requires extreme sagittal depth. And despite some mild scleral shape asymmetry, we were able to use a spherical landing zone. So the patient is very successful and happy that she doesn't have to worry about her lens spontaneously decentering or falling out of her eye. All right, this next patient is somebody I just recently saw. It's a 23-year-old female patient who has a corneal or multiple corneal scars of her left eye secondary to stromal keratitis from herpes simplex virus infection. And that scarring and corneal irregularity has left her best corrected vision, either with glasses or a soft contact lens at 20/50. So she did come to me and she wanted improved vision, so we were going to fit her with a scleral contact lens. These are her elevation maps. To the left, we see the elevation map of her cornea, and no surprise here that we get pretty moderate or to severe corneal irregularity. And then if we looked at the image to the right there, this is the elevation map of her sclera. And again, not unlike that last patient, the color map of her sclera is fairly uniform blue all the way around. In fact, actually, when we use software to make a measurement of the sclera, we find only a 50 micron sagittal height change of her scleral tissue. And so we can really classify her sclera as spherical. Now, initially, I ended up ordering her a scleral lens with a freeform landing zone or freeform design from corneal scleral topography. And even though when I put the lens on the eye, the lens looked absolutely perfect, she was never able to find comfort with that lens. And Lynette talked about this a little bit, though, in that these freeform lenses have a very tangential profile, just like the Europa Tangent. And we can see that OCT image that's down and to the left, that's actually a free-form landing zone lens. So it has, again, the same sort of nice profile that lands very softly, very evenly onto the scleral surface. And that can be despite a very severe scleral elevation irregularity. But what we can sometimes see for some patients who are wearing freeform lenses is the lenses can fit a little loose. And we can see an example of that in the video to the right from another patient, where as they blink, we can actually see some physical movement of the contact lens. And when we get movement with a lens like this, it will cause irritation. So for this patient, I could ask consultation to simply just tighten the lens down and steepen the landing zone to eliminate that movement. But in reconsidering her case and her scleral elevation profile that we categorized as spherical, I decided just to simply refit her in an Europa Tangent design. So I used the Europa Tangent design. This time, the standard diameter 16.5 millimeters. And with a power of minus 237, she was able to see a very sharp 20/20. So remember, she was 20/50 with best refraction. This scleral lens gives her 20/20 vision, a more modest sagittal depth value as we might expect for just a patient with only a corneal scar at 4,400 microns. And of course, because we categorized her sclera as spherical, our landing zone is spherical in design. And you can see from this video how evenly and how nicely it fits on her eye. She is, with the first Europa Tangent lens, completely comfortable with the lens. She loves it. She's very, very happy and satisfied with not only the vision, but the comfort and stability with that Europa Tangent lens. So very successful case.
That's a great looking landing zone, Dr. DeNaeyer.
Yeah, and this is what you see with the Europa Tangent, just time and time again, these really soft, even landing zones without any compression. Patients are very comfortable with the lens design.
So we're going to launch into I guess it's interactive. We're going to launch into this poll. What topics would you prefer Dr. DeNaeyer to dive into? Because we have more topics than we have time for, and we would like to know what you want to learn most about from Dr. DeNaeyer's experience. He's got so much experience, and I'm so happy that he's joining us today. And we're just going to wait just a little bit longer before we get these polls in, just to see what y'all want to hear about. I think all these topics are kind of fun to learn from you and see what we can do to enhance our fitting. Okay, jump to the next slide. Okay, so fogging is number 1. Lumps and bumps is number 2, and prism is number 3. So let's jump into, if I can get in there. Okay, fogging. So.
Well, we thought that this would be number 1, and no surprise, because I think even from my own personal experience that midday fogging for patients is one of the most frustrating complications that we see with scleral lens use. And that holds true for both the patient and the practitioner. And when we get midday fogging, the symptoms that the patient will relay is literally that they have foggy vision. And if it's foggy enough, if there's enough debris, then it can also decrease their visual acuity. The signs that you will see as a practitioner when this occurs is, of course, particulate within the fluid reservoir between the contact lens and the cornea. This can be observed with both slit lamp exam and anterior segment OCT. Now, one thing, though, that you have to rule out when you're talking about true midday fogging or particulate within the fluid reservoir is that there can be other issues that also cause the patient to have foggy vision. So you have to figure out what exactly is going on. And 2 of the most common complications that you might see that also give the patient the symptom of fogginess is, number one, a lens surface that's non-wetting, and then number two, a lens that has significant lens deposits. And of course, both of these can be diagnosed, and you can rule out these issues with a simple slit lamp examination. The third issue that actually I've seen even a little more commonly recently that can cause patients to report fogging, but really isn't midday fogging or particulate within the fluid reservoir, is corneal edema that can happen as the patient wears their scleral lens, where they have a corneal stress that they can't keep up with. And that edema will cause their vision to be foggy. But one key symptom that is different when a patient has corneal edema versus when they have true midday fogging is that they will also report that they see halos and rainbows around lights. So ask about that as well. But then again, like these other issues that you can rule out, a simple slit lamp examination will help you to determine if the cornea really is swelling or not. So here we have a patient who has a lot of debris within their fluid reservoir. We can see this on the image to the left, and they're going to be symptomatic of that. This is to the right, there's a little video, and you can see some lens movement there. There's some bubbles there and debris. And so this can certainly be fairly problematic for the patient visually. This is anterior segment OCT. And again, we can use OCT to pick up on midday fogging. What we really want ideally is the image to the left, where we have a nice clear fluid reservoir. Essentially, it's just black between the scleral lens and the cornea. But then if we look at the OCT to the right, this is a patient who has pretty moderate to severe fogging or debris within their fluid reservoir. And it shows up as this white matter on the OCT image. Well, what contributes to midday fogging? Well, there's several things, and a lot of it has to do with lens design. So we'll talk about landing zone misalignment, excessive central or limbal clearance, lens movement, and then of course, just generally patients who have ocular surface disease, especially severe ocular surface disease, are much more prone to have midday fogging simply because they have more debris within their tear film that can eventually find its way into the fluid reservoir. Certainly landing zone misalignment, where we have true edge lift, like is shown here on this video. When you have edge lift like this is really just an open door or a portal for bubbles and debris to get up underneath that landing zone of the scleral lens, and then a debris is able to make its way into the fluid reservoir and accumulate there, causing the patient's symptoms. So the key here, of course, is just to make sure that we eliminate any edge lift with our lens fits. And then excessive clearance, both excessive clearance centrally and in the limbal zone. And so for any patient who has midday fogging, I really try to decrease the clearance with my lens design as much as possible, even decreasing the central clearance below 100 microns, and then also below 50 microns for the area around the limbus. We don't want touch, but we really want to get that post settled fit as low as possible, as close to the cornea as we can, to eliminate as much fogging as possible. And then finally, lens movement. We talked a little bit about this with freeform lens designs, but anytime a scleral lens moves on the eye, that action, that movement of the lens will allow it to pump debris essentially up and underneath the landing zone. And again, debris can accumulate then within the fluid reservoir, causing symptoms. Well, let's just walk through a case example of mine. This is actually pretty common and a good example of what I might see in the clinic that causes a patient to have midday fogging or debris within their fluid reservoir. So this is a patient with keratoconus. She was previously wearing corneal gas-prone contact lenses. We refit her in scleral contact lenses with a 16.5 millimeter design. After several hours of wear, for her left eye only, she complained of fogging. And as we can see with this video, that as she blinks there, we had this subtle movement, not as much movement as the video previous, but if you actually key in on that little dotted hash temporally, we can see that the lens has this really slight movement to it. And it's just enough to cause debris to get up underneath of it. To the left there is a slit lamp image of the scleral lens on her eye. We can see that within the fluid reservoir there, that there is significant amount of debris that would cause the patient's symptoms. And then on the OCT image to the right there, we can see a lot of particulate, a lot of debris within that fluid reservoir. The post-scleral lens settling clearance of that fit is 250 microns. So the changes that I made to try to improve and decrease the debris within the fluid reservoir were, number one, is I dropped the sag 150 microns. So that would keep us at around at that 100 micron level. And then I also asked consultation to tighten the landing zone so we could try to reduce or eliminate any lens movement. And so this is the next order lens, and you can see this is the patient who's come to me back at her follow-up appointment. And to the left, we see that she has 20/25 vision, no longer complains of fogging. We can see that the fluid reservoir is significantly minimized, approximately 100 microns as we were calculating. And then if we look at the video, we've essentially eliminated any lens movement. Maybe you might see just a tiny, tiny little bit, but it's been eliminated enough that it the lens is no longer able to pump in debris. So this patient now is successful and very happy without symptoms. And then additionally, you may have seen this recently, a published paper by Dr. Maria Walker and colleagues at the University of Houston. And really, this is the definitive paper right now as it relates to midday fogging. And what Dr. Walker and her colleagues were able to determine is that the primary particulate that contributes to midday fogging within the fluid reservoir are nonpolar hydrophobic lipids. So really lipids within the fluid reservoir that mostly originate from the meibomian glands. And just a couple of key points in the discussion, if you're not able to read this paper later or haven't read it already. Number one, and we talked about this just a minute ago, is that there was a greater proportion of eyes with excessive limbal clearance in the midday fogging group as compared to the non-midday foggers. So excessive limbal clearance is sort of a risk for increased incidence of midday fogging. And I also found this next point pretty fascinating. The nonpolar nature of the lipids correlated to midday fogging suggests that using an application solution that is more lipophilic, e.g. artificial tears, and this would be off-label use, could reduce the precipitation of nonpolar lipids into the fluid reservoir. And I think we've heard and we've seen practitioners that, again, this is off-label use, but use non-preserved artificial tears partially within the bowl of the scleral contact lens. I've done it myself with patients, and it can, for some patients, really and significantly reduce their symptoms. Dr. Johns, have you had similar experience?
Oh yeah, I find if I've done everything to the fit and I can't get more toricity in there and I can't get it to, like, I've already tightened it and I can't, the movement is much less than using those Celluvisc or just a viscous solution makes a big difference. Don't know why, but it helps.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see, moving forward where the research goes, and if they can develop a very specific solution that we add to the reservoir that really helps to eliminate and dissolve those lipids, we might find sort of a cure-all. So I'm excited about that. And then, getting back to the Europa Tangent design, the Europa Tangent design inherently has a very low profile at the limbus. So just inherently, we don't see a lot of excessive limbal clearance with the tangent design. So from Dr. Walker's study and from experience, we can really conclude that the Europa Tangent design has the potential to decrease midday fogging for our patients. In fact, this is a quote from Dr. Lise Kramer. She's an internationally recognized specialist in specialty contact lens fitter. And this is her quote: "The Europa Tangent is an optimal design for the full spectrum of my scleral lens fits, from my more straightforward cases to my most challenging ones. I've seen," and this is what's key here, seen a huge decrease in midday fogging, lens awareness, and overall increase in patient satisfaction using this design. Definitely my go-to.
Good to hear. Sometimes it's tricky. They have those have that midday fogging. I cannot advance the slides. Well, I don't know if we have time to go through another topic, Dr. DeNaeyer. What do you think? Do you think we have time,
We
or?
could go through the prism. Let's go through
Okay, let's go through the prism.
That's pretty unique.
Absolutely.
Well, we as an industry have been able to add prism to gas perm contact lenses, corneal gas perm contact lenses, actually for decades, but it's sort of a minimal amount. With corneal GP lenses, we're limited to base down only, and that's because of rotational stability issues. And so then, of course, we can only add that to one eye, and it's only to help with vertical disparities. And then also we're typically limited to one or two prism diopters for that type of lens design.
All right, trying to advance. There we go.
For scleral contact lenses, though, because of their stability, because of the rotational stability, we're able to add not only base down prism, but base up prism, which means that we could add the prism for both eyes if it's a binocular patient that we're fitting both eyes for. And again, gets back to stabilization. We can actually correct for horizontal deviations by adding either base out or base in. Our limits are greater with the amount of prism diopters that we can design as compared to corneal gas perm contact lenses. In fact, our limits are around 4 to 5 prism diopters. And those limits really are secondary to lens thickness issues. So going beyond that, the lens just becomes a little too thick. When we add prism to a scleral lens design, it does have to be stabilized. And we stabilize it either using toricity or quadrant specific or freeform back surface designs.
Having problems advancing. Sorry.
That's right. And because of time issues, I think I'll just go through this first case example, Lynette. But this is a patient of mine who I've seen for years, a 60-year-old male patient who had been wearing scleral contact lenses for improved vision secondary to irregular astigmatism after radial keratotomy surgery. Unfortunately, this patient had cataract surgery and then suffered a retinal detachment. And after his surgery from his retinal detachment, he had double vision. In fact, he had 9 prism diopters of right hyperdeviation, which is a lot. Now, typically when I add prism to a scleral lens, I don't add the amount that I measure. I use loose prisms and try to find the lowest amount of prism that will allow the patient to fuse. So actually, in this case, even though we measure a total of 9 vertical, 2 prism diopters of base down for the right eye allowed the patient to fuse. And so I simply just basically ordered him a new right scleral lens. This is a freeform lens design, so that's what allowed the lens to rotationally orientate in its particular and needed spot. And with that lens, that patient was able to see well and have a vision without diplopia. And because otherwise, if we didn't add the prism to a scleral contact lens, the patient would really be forced to wear glasses over the top with added prism correction. So this really helped free him up, and he could just wear his scleral contact lenses only.
Great. I'm going to just zip through. We have some questions. Before we break to the questions, if you're new to Visionary Optics, I just want to welcome you to our family. We're really fortunate to have you tonight as part of our webinar audience, and we hope you learned something about the new design and see if if you could implement it into your practice. If you do decide to join partnership with us, we have what's called a partnership onboarding, and we have our team meet with you and discuss whatever things that will address your needs to bringing a scleral lens into your practice. Whether you're experienced and want something else to enhance your current practice, or you're new, we have the ability to help you get started with scleral lenses. There's a quick turnaround time with the lenses. They're usually out of the lab within 24 to 48 hours, and the lab is in Virginia. And I just want to say how nice the team is and the individual support that Visionary Optics has. In addition to the consultation team, I'm also offering what's called Learning with Lynette sessions. These are just one-on-one peer-to-peer sessions that you can schedule into my calendar if you have questions about how to fit. If you have a difficult case, we can walk through it together. It's just time to just answer any questions you may have, or if you have staff members that need to learn various basics about scleral lenses, I'm happy to train your staff with you or with just the staff alone. So these are things that are available to you if you're new to Visionary Optics. We're really excited for you to partner with us. We want to thank you so much for your participation tonight and asking all of these great questions. Feel free to reach out to our team, especially if you're already a partner with Visionary Optics or you're interested in it. Our team is ready to welcome you into the family. Dr. DeNaeyer, it's been truly a pleasure to work with you tonight on this and to learn all of your wonderful clinical pearls. And I just want to thank you and everybody for your attendance this evening, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Appreciate that.